Imagine this, you're in a room full of people and not a single one of them knows the real you. They smile at you, nod politely, some even compliment you, but not a single person respects you. You've spent years being agreeable, flexible, and easy to get along with. But deep down you feel it, that low-grade resentment, that dull chronic ache of being overlooked. You're not being rewarded for your kindness. You're being punished for your lack of boundaries. This is what happens when you're nice to everyone. Now, let's be precise about what's happening neurologically. Every time you avoid conflict, every time you smile and say yes when you mean no, your brain reinforces a loop safety through self-erasure. The amygdala interprets confrontation as danger. Your prefrontal cortex rationalizes the avoidance. You're training your nervous system to equate silence with survival. And in doing so, you're eroding your self-respect. Being nice is not the same as being kind. Kindness requires strength. Niceness, the compulsive kind, is rooted in fear. It's a coping mechanism that begins in childhood and metastasizes into adulthood as people-pleasing, indecision, burnout. You're not making the world better. You're just making yourself smaller. Let's talk about what happens biologically when you suppress your anger, your disagreement, your authentic emotional responses. Cortisol spikes. Dopamine drops. You feel like you're doing the right thing, but your body knows you're lying. Chronic niceness creates internal inflammation, not just metaphorically, but literally. You weaken your immune response, you disrupt your sleep, your memory suffers. Your very physiology is screaming for you to draw the line. And here's the paradox. The more you try to be liked by everyone, the less they value you. Humans are wired to test boundaries. If you don't set them, they will keep pushing. Your nervous system might hate confrontation, but your life will demand it. Assertiveness is not aggression. It's clarity. It's integrity. It's the foundation of trust. You can't build real relationships, professional or personal, if you're constantly editing yourself to be palatable. There is no reward for being a martyr to other people's comfort. At Stanford, there is no medal for overextending yourself to avoid judgment. The world is not waiting to appreciate your quiet suffering. It's waiting for you to respect your own limits. Because the moment you do, everything changes. Your biology, your posture, your perception of reality. You start firing differently. Your dopamine pathways rewire. Confidence isn't built through approval. It's built through boundaries. So the next time you feel that impulse, to say yes when you mean no, to soften your truth, to keep the peace at your own expense, pause. Let that discomfort rise. Don't run from it. Use it. It's the signal that you're not betraying others. You're finally choosing not to betray yourself. Most people think being nice is a sign of maturity, of being emotionally evolved. But in reality, for many, it's a deeply embedded survival strategy, one that begins early in life when your nervous system learns that being agreeable is the safest route to connection. This is what we call a neuroadaptive behavior. Your brain, especially the limbic system, interprets conflict as a threat. So instead of expressing disagreement, it steers you toward placation. You smile, you nod, you agree. But neurologically, what you're really doing is trying to stay safe by minimizing your perceived risk of rejection. This isn't kindness, it's a reflex. And the more it's rewarded, by temporary peace, by approval, by avoiding discomfort, the more the brain hardwires it, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which governs emotional decision-making, starts favoring this path of least resistance. And over time, it becomes automatic. You're not choosing to be nice. You're being driven by a deeply conditioned fear response. This is critical to understand because if you don't bring conscious awareness to this pattern, your default state becomes self-abandonment. It's not emotional intelligence. It's emotional inhibition. And while it may help you avoid friction in the short term, it keeps you stuck in an identity that's not yours. You're not showing up in the world as yourself. You're showing up as a version of yourself that's been edited for acceptability. And that's not resilience. That's neurological submission. Each time you avoid saying what you really think or feel, your brain encodes that avoidance as a successful strategy for survival. The circuitry involved here is precise. Your amygdala detects potential social threat, disapproval, conflict, rejection, and signals the hypothalamus to initiate a stress response. But instead of confronting the discomfort, your prefrontal cortex steps in to regulate that emotional surge by choosing appeasement. You say yes when you mean no. You nod when you want to push back. And in doing so, you're reinforcing a neural loop. Avoidance equals safety. This becomes a deeply conditioned behavior. Your synapses literally fire more efficiently along those pathways the more you use them. You're not just making a social decision. You're laying down neuroplastic tracks that say suppress, conform, avoid. And because the brain is plastic, the more often you do this, the easier it becomes to default to silence, to shrink, to submit. You're training your nervous system to choose safety over authenticity again and again. But here's the critical insight. What keeps you safe in the moment is what keeps you stuck long term. The more you reinforce these patterns, the more your identity becomes wrapped around being non-threatening, agreeable, invisible. And the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to even recognize what your own boundaries are. Because neurologically, you've taught yourself that having them is unsafe. Over time, every instant self-suppression, every polite nod, every forced smile, every yes that should have been a no, starts to chip away at your self-respect. And this isn't just psychological erosion, it's neurobiological. Self-respect is linked to a strong, integrated sense of self, and that sense is built through congruence. When your internal state matches your external behavior. But when you consistently betray your own feelings to maintain harmony or avoid disapproval, you create what's called a dissonant signal in the brain. This dissonance triggers activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for conflict monitoring. Your brain detects that something's off. You feel it as a vague unease, a tension in your chest, maybe a tight jaw or a pit in your stomach. That's your nervous system trying to alert you that your actions are out of alignment with your values. But when you ignore that signal repeatedly, your self-concept weakens. The reward circuitry, the dopamine system, stops firing when you comply because your brain knows you're not acting in integrity. And the result, you don't trust yourself. You start to look outward for cues on how to behave, what to say, who to be. You become dependent on others to reflect your worth back to you because you've lost the internal scaffolding that self-respect provides. This is not a mindset issue. It's not a confidence issue. It's a failure to act in alignment, neuron by neuron, choice by choice. There's a fundamental misunderstanding that keeps people stuck, thinking that being nice is the same as being kind. They're not the same, not neurologically, behaviorally, not emotionally. Niceness is reactive. It's a pattern. Kindness, on the other hand, is deliberate. It's a decision rooted in strength, not fear. When you're being nice just to avoid discomfort, what you're doing is modulating your behavior based on external threat signals. Your limbic system is trying to maintain homeostasis, not express compassion. Kindness requires presence, discernment, and the ability to say no when necessary. It involves the prefrontal cortex engaging with empathy, not anxiety. Niceness, in contrast, is often about minimizing perceived danger, not maximizing connection. You're not being kind because you care. You're being nice because you're afraid. You're afraid of confrontation, rejection, disapproval. So you disarm yourself, smiling, agreeing, folding, even when it costs you. And here's what most people don't realize. True kindness sometimes looks like resistance. It looks like honest feedback. It looks like telling someone something they don't want to hear because it's the truth. That takes courage. That takes regulation of the nervous system. Kindness means you're stable enough in yourself to act with integrity, even when it's uncomfortable. But niceness is about escaping discomfort, not leaning into truth. And over time, that avoidance strips you of the clarity and stability that real kindness is built on. And when you suppress what you really feel, your frustration, your anger, your disagreement, you're not just making a social compromise, you're initiating a cascade of physiological consequences inside your body. The stress response becomes chronic. Every time you override your internal state to maintain external peace, your hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal, HPA axis gets activated. Cortisol levels rise. And here's the problem. Your body was never designed to live in that state for long periods of time. Suppressed emotion is stored as tension. Your heart rate variability decreases. Your sleep becomes fragmented. Your immune system becomes less efficient. You might get sick more often, experience brain fog, or develop chronic fatigue. And you'll rarely connect to the fact that you've spent years avoiding emotional honesty. But that's exactly what's happening. Emotional suppression is a physiological event, not just a psychological one. And your nervous system keeps the score. There's also a neurological cost, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, planning, and executive function, becomes impaired when stress hormones remain elevated. This reduces your ability to think clearly, set boundaries, and advocate for yourself. So by avoiding short-term discomfort in a social interaction, you're actually reducing your long-term capacity to manage your life effectively. You're not being peaceful, you're being neurologically depleted. And the worst part, most people don't even realize it. They think they're just tired or unmotivated or overwhelmed. But underneath that, there's often a backlog of unexpressed emotion, a pattern of compliance that's literally burning them out from the inside. It's not about being tougher. It's about being aligned. Biologically, emotionally, behaviorally. That's how you stop leaking energy and start rebuilding a system that supports clarity and strength. Human beings are wired to test limits neurologically and socially. It's how we understand where safety lies, where power resides, where connection is real. So when you show up in relationships without boundaries, when you're perpetually agreeable, always accommodating, what you're signaling is not strength or warmth, but instability. Your nervous system may think it's creating harmony, but from the outside, it reads as uncertainty. And uncertainty, especially in social hierarchies, gets interpreted as weakness. People don't respect what's inconsistent. The brain is constantly scanning for predictability in behavior. It's a safety mechanism. And when someone consistently avoids conflict, never pushes back, always says yes, they become background noise in the social environment. There's no tension, no edge, no boundary to respond to. That person becomes easy to overlook, easy to use, easy to forget. Not because others are cruel, but because you've trained them to see you as a non-factor in terms of agency and presence. What you're actually doing, neurologically speaking, is suppressing the very signals that create identity in a group. Assertiveness activates social salience networks in the brain. Those areas that say, this person matters. Their voice has weight. But if you're constantly stepping back, minimizing yourself over accommodating, those neural circuits never get activated in others. And you're fading from the map without realizing it. And here's the irony: the more effort you put into being universally liked, the less influence you actually have, because influence doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being respected. And respect is earned through clarity, boundaries, and the willingness to be disliked when necessary. When you begin to assert yourself, not aggressively, but with grounded clarity, you initiate a powerful shift in your neurobiology. Assertiveness isn't just a social skill, it's a neurological upgrade. The moment you speak your truth, especially when it's uncomfortable, your brain stops running the fear-based loop that's been wired through years of people-pleasing. You activate the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in self-awareness and emotional regulation, and you begin to rewire how your system perceives threat. Instead of interpreting confrontation as danger, your nervous system starts to recognize it as a pathway to strength. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reward, starts to fire. Not because you're pleasing others, but because you're acting in alignment. Your sense of agency increases. You feel more in control. And that perception of control, especially under stress, is one of the most protective factors for long-term mental health. Physiologically, your posture changes. Your voice stabilizes. Your breath becomes more regulated. These aren't just byproducts. They're part of a feedback loop. When your behavior signals to your brain that you can handle difficult situations, your sympathetic nervous system calms down. You become less reactive, more focused, and more resilient. Assertiveness isn't a personality trait. It's a trainable response, one that reshapes your internal chemistry and your external impact. The more often you step into that space where you say what you mean, hold the line, risk disapproval, the stronger the neural circuits of confidence become. It's not ego. It's not dominance. It's coherence between your internal world and your external behavior and research roles at Stanford. And that coherence is what allows you to navigate life with clairaction and a calm kind of power that doesn't need to be loud to be felt. When you build your sense of worth on the approval of others, you create a fragile system, one that is biologically unstable and emotionally unsustainable. The dopamine reward system in your brain, which is designed to reinforce goal-directed behavior, starts to become hijacked by external validation. Every compliment, every smile of approval, every thank you becomes a tiny hit. And like any addiction, the brain begins to crave that feedback, orienting your choices around what will gain approval rather than what aligns with your internal values. This creates a kind of emotional dependency, not on a person, but on a reaction You lose autonomy because your nervous system is no longer guided by your own internal compass. It's scanning the environment for cues. Am I good enough yet? Was that okay? Did they like me? The moment the validation disappears, your internal stability goes with it. You crash because your self-worth isn't rooted in identity. It's floating on the opinions of others. Neurologically, this is costly. It disrupts the brain's default mode network, the circuitry responsible for self-referential thought, your ability to understand who you are independent of external input. You become what neuroscience calls externally regulated, meaning your emotional state is being shaped not by what's happening inside of you, but by unpredictable, uncontrollable signals from outside. That's a recipe for anxiety, burnout, and emotional volatility. But what makes this even more dangerous is how subtle it is. It doesn't feel like dependency. It feels like connection, like being liked, like being accepted. But what's actually happening is a slow erosion of agency, a learned helplessness wrapped in politeness. And until you interrupt that pattern, until you start making decisions based on alignment rather than applause, you stay trapped in a loop that rewards compliance and punishes authenticity. The truth is, healthy confrontation is one of the most important catalysts for growth, not just in relationships, but in your own brain. When you hold your ground, when you engage directly with someone who disagrees with you, you're not creating conflict for the sake of conflict. You're creating an opportunity for clarity and mutual understanding. And in that moment, you're actually strengthening your neural networks for emotional regulation, decision-making, and social connection. Confrontation, when done with clarity and respect, and activates a whole different set of circuits in the brain. The prefrontal cortex responsible for higher-level thinking takes charge. The amygdala, the fear center, calms down. You're engaging your brain's executive functions rather than its survival instincts. When you assert yourself, saying, "This is my truth, this is my boundary," you force the brain to stop scanning for threats and instead to analyze the situation rationally. It builds your capacity to manage stress because your nervous system no longer perceives honest conflict as a life or death event. And here's the key insight of this kind of confrontation isn't just about the other person. It's about you. It's about reinforcing your identity in real time. Every time you stand firm in your values, you cement your sense self. Your brain starts to recognize that you can handle discomfort, that you can engage with difficult people or situations without collapsing or compromising your integrity. This creates a virtuous cycle. The more you confront, the more confident you become. Your sense of self-worth is no longer in question because you've built it on a foundation of emotional strength, not external validation. What most people don't understand is that this kind of confrontation, far from damaging relationships, actually strengthens them. It builds trust at Stanford. It shows the other person that you're not afraid to say what matters to you and that you're capable of handling the tension that comes with honest interaction. And while it might feel uncomfortable in the moment, that discomfort is the muscle growth of your emotional resilience. It's how you build the courage to handle more in the future and how you start attracting relationships that are rooted in authenticity and mutual respect, not avoidance and appeasement. When you start prioritizing self-respect over people pleasing, something profound shifts, not just in your relationships, but in your entire physiological state. Self-respect. Respect isn't just a mental or emotional concept. It's a biological one. It's the result of consistently acting in alignment with your values and boundaries, regardless of the external noise. And as you do this, your brain begins to rewire. The more you show up for yourself, saying no when you need to, standing firm in your truth, the more your brain's reward system starts to recognize that self-affirmation is the true source of stability. This reestablishes a sense of coherence between your thoughts, actions, and feelings. The first step is often uncomfortable, even disorienting. You may feel the weight of judgment from others or the sharp pang of guilt as you set boundaries. But that discomfort is a signal that you're doing something new, at something that's recalibrating your nervous system. It's like breaking a new shoe. They feel awkward at first, but over time they fit perfectly. Your body, your mind, and your relationships start to align with the new truth that your self-respect is non-negotiable. In neurological terms, this self-respect strengthens your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making and emotional regulation center of the brain. It allows you to navigate your environment with increased clarity and confidence. You stop second-guessing your worth. You stop scanning for approval. And this shift in how you perceive impacts your social interactions. Others begin to treat you with more respect, not because you demand it, but because you no longer tolerate anything less. Your boundaries become clear, and that clarity is magnetic. People sense strength when it's rooted in integrity, not ego. That's at Stanford. They can trust that when you say something, it's backed by genuine conviction. But most importantly, when you start respecting yourself, you're no longer at the mercy of your environment. Your emotional state becomes less dependent on others' approval and more rooted in your own internal framework. This makes you more resilient, more adaptable, and far more capable of facing challenges with calm, rational clarity. The moment you stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others, you unlock the true power to shape your life. And that power comes from the simple, unshakable truth that your worth is inherent, not negotiable.